Welcome to the Fresh and Safe podcast, where we share fresh ideas and practical insights to elevate food safety in the produce supply chain. In this 6-part series, we explore the Fresh Produce Safety Centre's journey, food safety guidelines, emerging regulations, real-world case studies, and global food safety trends. Whether you're a grower, a service provider, or part of the broader food safety ecosystem, join us as we navigate the evolving landscape of fresh produce food safety in New Zealand and Australia. So I'm Farzana Adams, and we're here today with the Fresh and Safe podcast, which is a fresh take on produce food safety brought to you by the Fresh Produce Safety Centre. In this pilot series, we explore the origins, evolution, and future of fresh produce food safety in New Zealand and Australia. From guidelines and regulations to real-world case studies and global perspectives, this podcast shares the conversations, challenges, and ideas driving better food safety outcomes across the sector. With me today as my co-host is Susannah.
Hi, I'm Susannah, Technical Officer for the Fresh Produce Safety Centre, and we're excited to invite you to today's Fresh and Safe podcast. It's designed for fresh produce stakeholders seeking to elevate food safety practices across the supply chain. Across this 6-part pilot series, we will share practical insights, real-world stories, and fresh perspectives, covering everything from FPSC's journey and the latest guidelines to emerging regulations, innovative case studies, and global food safety trends. Whether you're a grower, a service provider, or part of the broader food safety community, join us as we navigate the evolving landscape of fresh produce safety in Australia and New Zealand.
Thanks, Susannah. We're delighted to be here with you guys today, and we're so thankful that you tuned into our podcast. We're joined today by two of our board directors. We have Robyn McConchie and Andreas Klieber, and I'm going to ask them both to briefly introduce themselves and the context and the relevance for why they're here today to talk to us about how we started, where we're going, and where we're headed. So I'm going to ask Robyn, first of all, to introduce yourself for us, please.
Thanks, Farzana. Yes, I'm Robyn McConchie, and I'm an emeritus professor at the University of Sydney. And I guess I'm here today because I'm one of the founding members of the Fresh Produce Safety Centre way back in 2011.
Thanks, Robyn. It's so exciting to have you and to unpack the journey of where the centres come from. And our current board chair, Andreas, over to you.
Yes, hi, and nice to meet you all. My name is Andreas Klieber, and I've been involved with the fresh produce industry and food safety for many years now through my practice in my own business, Quality Associates, but also through retail work in Australia and overseas.
Excellent. Thanks, Andreas. So for our listeners, we are doing a 6-series pilot. So today you're going to hear all about the story so far, our journey, and our future direction. In our next episode, we're going to unpack the guidelines for fresh produce food safety. Episode 3 has us navigating new rules and regulations that impact fresh produce in Australia. Episode 4 has us swinging over to our friends in New Zealand, where we're going to look at some case studies. In episode 5, we come back and spend some time talking to our Australian colleagues about their journey in implementing the new standards. And finally, we'll wrap up with global insights for fresh produce food safety. So with that, I think I'm going to hand over to Susannah and get you to unpack this with our guests.
So, Robyn, I'm going to put my first question through to yourself. What inspired the creation of the Fresh Produce Safety Centre?
Well, I think it was a bit serendipitous, Susannah. I had started going to the PMA conferences in the United States, which is sort of a bit like Hawk Connections on steroids. It's absolutely huge and really stimulating and exciting. And I was at one of those conferences in 2010 and 11, and I came across the Centre for Produce Safety in the United States. And that organisation began because they had an E. coli outbreak in fresh spinach in 2008, which led to the industry rallying round and putting together some research funds to actually find out what caused it and how they can prevent it in the future and how to minimise risk in fresh salads into the future. And I found these presentations incredibly inspiring. There was Dr. Bob there, and there was Bonnie Farrelly, who was the CEO of CPS as well. And I talked to them about the CPS and what its role was. And it really came to me, what was happening in Australia? Was there such an organisation in Australia? And are we doing any fresh produce research in Australia? So that's how it really began. I came back and I spoke to the PMA chair, who was Michael Worthington at the time. And together we put our heads together, and we started to think about how we could look at such an organisation in Australia. So we actually ended up getting a grant from Horticulture Innovation to actually explore that whether or not the industry could benefit from such an organisation. And we held our first conference in 2012, where we asked the industry, people from all across the supply chain, whether or not they thought it was a good idea and what this centre could do. And we got 98% support from all the delegates who were there. There were probably about 80 delegates there. And they all said yes. And the sorts of things they wanted us to do was to call and manage prioritised research, to disseminate research outcomes, and also to provide information and education to the industry.
What an incredible start to the journey. And I think just testimony to industry need as well being answered. So how do you think that's evolved over the years since it was first started?
Yes, well, it did take us a couple of years to get started, and we were actually launched in 2014 officially. We had to set up the board, set up a technical committee, and then, I guess, get all the administrative activities in place. It was actually a joint organisation. It had PMA, or it's now called IFPA, but PMA was the sole member at that stage. And the University of Sydney was the host for the organisation. So all of the offices and admin activities were hosted by the University of Sydney. But it is, in actual fact, was an industry-led, industry-funded, not-for-profit company that was established to promote and enhance fresh produce safety through research, education, and outreach. So that's how we actually began. And since 2014, we've had conferences every year, we've had guidelines and published material, we've had workshops, we've had outreach sessions. So we've been very busy over the last 10 to 12 years.
If I can just jump in there, Robyn, can you tell us a few things that you're incredibly proud of that the centre's achieved in the last 10 years?
Oh, goodness, there are quite a lot of things that we're very proud of. I think the guidelines, we became the custodian of the guidelines, and we've had 3 revisions of the guidelines since then, and it really is one of our most used documents on the website. It's free and available to everybody. So anybody can download it. Even people overseas are using it religiously. So that's fantastic. And it really does give a great overview of how to manage all of the aspects of fresh produce safety from start to finish, from the farm right through to packaging at the end, and even food safety culture. So that's one of the things that I'm very proud of. And I know you're going to have a podcast on that specific topic in the future.
Oh, absolutely. Look, our listeners, please make sure you dial in for episode 2, where we're going to unpack the guidelines.
So, Robyn, can you talk to us a bit about FPSC's impact, but also highlighting some of the key projects, research, and collaborations that we've been involved with as well?
I guess one of the first things that we had to do was to understand what we didn't know and what we were going to do about it. So one of the projects we commissioned was Understanding the Gaps, and that is located on our website. That was a really important document because it actually highlighted about 13 different research areas that really needed attention. And that led to the FPSC, or the Fresh Produce Safety Centre, and the University of Sydney, plus a number of other research organisations applying for a very large grant to address at least some of those research topics where we needed information to assist us. It was specifically targeted at understanding food safety in the Australian environment. There's lots of literature in the journals, international journals, about how to cope with water, manures, incursions of animals, etc. But we didn't have any Australia-specific information that was actually being conducted here in Australia. That was a very successful project. It ran from 2017 to 2021, and it was particularly successful in building capacity in the industry. We produced 7 PhD researchers and also 3 postdocs, and all of them are actually working in the food industry, and about 5 of them are working specifically in food safety. So we're very proud of that capacity building aspect that the project allowed us to conduct. We worked hand in glove with industry, who actually funded part of the research projects, and they helped us conduct the research. We met every month. We had a research symposium every year, and it was a really exciting time for both the students, the postdocs, and the industry in conducting this research. So that was terrific. We hope to do something similar in the future with current universities like La Trobe and also the University of Adelaide. I mentioned the guidelines, which we're going to talk more about in future podcasts, so I won't go more into that. But we have done other things, such as work with the mushroom industry. We conducted several projects with the Mushroom Association and Hort Innovation to try and understand the food safety risks with mushrooms, the effect of compost, packaging, cultivar differences, and things like that. We've also run an annual conference for the last 11 years, so that's no mean feat. And we actually have another one coming up at the end of July, so make sure you look at our website and try to join us on that day. That would be another fantastic event to attend. We've had international speakers come to attend those conferences, and they've really been incredibly vibrant, stimulating, and fantastic networking events where we've all learned about new ideas for improving our food safety. Alongside those activities, we've been doing a fair bit of outreach. We've had grower guides, we've had fact sheets, we've had road shows, we've gone out to industry and given talks. So lots of outreach in that respect. And finally, we've had some professional development workshops. Richard Bennett, who was one of our technical people when we first started, he's also given talks in New Zealand and done lots of road shows. So we do miss Richard, but we're still doing those sorts of road shows with Farzana and Susannah. More recently, we've just had the Horticulture Food Safety Initiative, which has been running for 2 years now. But I'll leave that to Susannah to expand on what that project is about. But that project has 1 more year to run and has been very successful.
Thanks, Robyn. So the Horticulture Food Safety Initiative, as Robyn mentioned, we were awarded from Hort Innovation with 11 co-funding partners, and it's been an amazing opportunity to really lift the bar on food safety across all crop types in Australia and New Zealand. Few of the outreach opportunities has been the likes of roadshows, webinars, and workshops, which will increase in the next phase of the project as well over the next coming year. But probably one of the biggest milestones or achievements from the project was the creation of a community of practice, where we have 85 food safety professionals that represent the supply chain across Australia and New Zealand that come together and talk about all things food safety. So it's an opportunity to share knowledge, learn from peers, but also troubleshoot some of the emerging risks in food safety as well. So really proud to be a part of that. And like you say, Robyn, just one of those projects that are just adding to the overall improvement of our supply chain for fresh produce.
And look, I think if I can just chime in there, Susannah's doing a fantastic job of leading that as our technical lead on the project. And what that project has also allowed us to do is connect a lot more closely with our New Zealand stakeholders. And I had a fantastic chat with Damien Farrelly about that recently, and so we'll share that with you as well. So before we spoke to Andreas and Robyn, I had a chance to connect with Damien Farrelly to get a New Zealand perspective on the Horticulture Food Safety Initiative and its impact. And here's what he shared with us about the work happening in New Zealand, the context of the Fresh Produce Safety Centre, and how it's shaping food safety in New Zealand. Damien, welcome to our podcast. We're absolutely delighted that you're able to join us for episode 1 of the Fresh and Safe podcast. Before we dive into a bit of a chat, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and your role?
Hi, Farzana. Thanks very much for having me on this show. My name is Damien Farrelly. I'm General Manager for New Zealand Good Agricultural Practice, NZ GAP, at Horticulture New Zealand, based in Wellington. So NZ GAP is a certification program for fruit and vegetables. We cover food safety, environmental sustainability and social practice. But food safety is the core focus of the program, and it's been around for 25 years. So I'm very keen to keep us moving forward in that space, and what the centre does in the guidelines space really underpins the GAP standards. So that's why I've become a director on the Fresh Produce Safety Centre.
That's fantastic, Damien, and we really appreciate the support that you've provided to the Fresh Produce Safety Centre. And wow, what an exciting legacy, 25 years. That is so cool. So yeah, can you share a little bit with us about how the New Zealand growers are engaging with this initiative?
Well, I suppose some of the ways that they've been engaging the more traditional channels like the newsletters, and you've got some webinars, social media. We've had some good uptake that way. But then through the initiative, we set up some new platforms for engagement with the community practice and also the help desk, and already an increase in the likes of webinars and grower workshops as well. So I've had some really good feedback from growers, especially the workshops. They like the face-to-face element of the initiative, and that's been great.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Look, Susannah is much more across the details here, but I think our New Zealand representation of the community of practice is now sort of sitting upwards of 30 to 40%, which is pretty exciting.
Yeah, so that's been great to get that group there. And as the Vegetables Roadshow, the Research Roadshow, that the initiative has been, I think Susannah and yourself have been able to present to growers face to face, and like 10 workshops around the country, and getting a good spread of growers, big and small, but also said all over the country, rather than the growers having to travel to us. We're going to them, which has been very much appreciated from their perspective.
So we also recognize the commonality of some of the challenges across Australia and New Zealand. Hence, our guidelines are super relevant across both of those countries. But can you just touch a little bit on the differences, Damien? What's different about New Zealand?
What's different about New Zealand? I think strengths and weaknesses of both approaches. I suppose one of the differences in New Zealand is in the regulatory context. We have New Zealand food safety and one country essentially, compared to Australia with the numerous states. That seems to add a lot of complexity when it comes to the food safety space. Also, I suppose that geographic spread, being a smaller country, it's easier for New Zealand to collaborate on some of these issues. But then commercially very export focused in New Zealand, so very connected into what's happening globally. Not that Australia isn't, but I think it's way more front of mind for the New Zealand operators. They're thinking about what's the European market looking for, what's the American market looking for. So yeah, tuned into what's happening in the global space, which is great. On the challenges side, I think New Zealand, we've had some pretty big weather events in the last few years with cyclones, and we've responded to those challenges, but I think probably not as prepared as Australia is. Maybe a little bit more used to having those weather events, and the centre has developed great guidelines in that area, and there's good outreach. I suppose when there is a flood event in Australia, they're able to respond quite quickly. In New Zealand, that's something we need to work on more. So it's probably a challenge on our side with the increased frequency of these more severe weather events. We need to be prepared. Yes, they're probably some of the differences, challenges, and opportunities as well.
Excellent. Thank you very much for that. I think we certainly see that having the touch points across the Tasman is the centralized coordination to responses seems to be a lot more cohesive in Australia. And certainly I think that's something that our New Zealand colleagues could potentially learn from. Equally, I think the Food Act provides some really interesting differences in that the Food Act in New Zealand covers all food produced in New Zealand from a regulatory food safety perspective. So could you just spend a little bit of time touching on that and the unique position that puts New Zealand in?
Yeah, so the Food Act covers I suppose horticulture in terms of production and animal products and wine have their own regulatory space. But that has been, I suppose, in one way, really good to have that one consistent regulation across food and production and processing retail, and I suppose brings everyone in line with similar requirements. In New Zealand, we have very high levels of certification via the GAP programs. So probably growers pretty comfortable we're already meeting the food safety expectations. But what the Food Act did was level the playing field that those that weren't engaging in a GAP program were having to meet was a base level of food safety requirements, which was good, kind of levels the playing field and also ensures that safe and suitable food for all consumers, which is what we really want. The other positive, I suppose, it is that we've got one regulation across the whole country, and I know in Australia that has been a bit of a challenge. You've got the likes of Farzana's that coming to try and get consistency across food standards in all the states, and with the Triple P seeing the challenges with trying to roll that out. So certainly benefits of having a what will be equivalent of federal government led regulation where it's consistent across all, and gives that confidence to consumers, but also to other countries and exporting markets that we have got this strong food safety regulatory environment that all operators are working to.
Excellent. And I think for our listeners, please tune in to our upcoming episodes where we will do a deep dive on these Triple P standards that Damien's just referenced that are coming into effect for Australia. Damien, any final thoughts in terms of the value of connection, collaboration?
I think that the collaboration is absolutely fundamental to what we're trying to do here. I've been a big advocate in the last few years, and especially in the last 12 to 18 months, seeing the benefits of the likes of this project and what the Fresh Produce Safety Centre is doing with outreach, conference, symposium, where bringing these like-minded people together from across the sector is just absolutely fundamental to making progress in this area. Everyone's really busy in their own world, but what the centre has been able to do is bring growers, researchers, regulators, standard owners, advisors all in the room at the same time. It's the only place it happens. And as I said earlier on with GAP, we work in the food safety, the environmental and social practice space, and this is the only one of those three where this kind of level of collaboration is happening. I think it's absolutely crucial for making progress. The centre is seen as a trusted voice. People sometimes don't want to raise concerns with the regulator directly, so being able to facilitate those conversations in a safe way is really important as well, and facilitating connections. People might not know about this other initiative that's happening, so raising that awareness, connecting people with others that they might not have connected with without this initiative. I think they're all really crucial things that has been delivered via the project and the value that we're creating. So you don't really have a safe food environment or can't really promote food safety without collaboration, and we've seen it as fundamental. It is fundamental, and it is being, I suppose, delivered and celebrated via the project and the centre and more generally.
Fantastic, Damien. Thank you so much for making the time to join us. It's been a delight chatting with you. There's a couple of points that you touched on. Just want to remind our listeners, we've got the International Fresh Produce Safety Symposium coming up on the 29th and the 30th of July in Sydney. So please make sure you register and you join us for some great conversations around food safety, fresh produce. And Damien, we really appreciate your insights and perspectives and really look forward to the continued collaboration and cooperation. Thanks so much for your time. So we've just had a great conversation about some of the things that the Fresh Produce Safety Centre has accomplished over the last decade. Andreas, I would love to explore with you, what are some of the challenges that you see in fresh produce food safety?
Yeah, thank you for that, Farzana. I think we've built a good foundation with what the work that we have done already with the Fresh Produce Safety Centre. And for us, the challenge still remains as an industry to make sure that we reach all parts of the industry, whether they're small growers that go to markets, or whether it is larger suppliers supplying into the major retailers. The risk to the industry is significant if people don't do the right thing. And so that's why we need a level playing field where everybody understands what their responsibilities are. And so to that end, we've been working quite extensively, not just with the major players in the food industry, but we've also been reaching out through market associations and with regulators who are responsible for food safety in Australia and New Zealand as well. The other challenges are an ever-evolving dynamic in the growing space, where we're seeing quite significant flooding events and drought events, and all of those have a significant impact on food safety. And so that's where we, as the Fresh Produce Safety Centre, are providing guidance and information and hopefully support the growers that are battling with those sort of issues themselves. Food safety in fresh produce has always been something about managing inputs and safety in the first place, rather than relying on further processing steps. And so really that understanding of what goes on the field, in the orchard, is really quite critical. Now, we still have some gaps in knowledge, and as we look around the world, we can see research progressing and giving us new answers, but we also need to make sure that they apply in our situations where, for example, some of the information coming out of the US might relate to high impact animal farming surrounding horticulture. Our processes may not be the same, but we do nevertheless need to understand what the challenges are. And so water, soil, inputs, there are certainly things that we need to think about. On top of chemicals and biological hazards, we're also starting to see more issues with things like plastics. And so we don't fully understand what that does to our production systems, to health impacts and so on. So there's always something new to look at and to understand. And I think that's one of the strengths of the center, that we can actually look at the information, make it relevant to the industry in Australia, and make sure that we're updating our guidelines so they stay ever on trend, I suppose. So very excited to see the updates to the guidelines for fresh produce food safety being published later on this year at our annual symposium. The other challenge that we have sometimes with our industry is that we need to bring people together to actually exchange information. And so that's where the symposium is really very useful as a forum.
Excellent. Thanks for that, Andreas. So yeah, we are really looking forward to having some good conversations with impacted stakeholders around the recent STEC recall in Australia. And we're also really privileged that we're going to have Professor Phil Bremer from the University of Otago join us at the International Fresh Produce Safety Symposium in July to talk a little bit about the toxicological hazards that Andreas has just mentioned that are becoming more and more relevant for fresh produce, recognizing that primarily we've been concerned about microbiological hazards more so than chemical hazards. So that's a really good point. Thanks for that, Andreas. Robyn, did you have any builds on some of the challenges that you see for the fresh produce sector with regards to food safety?
Yes, all of the topics that Andreas addressed are really important and will always be important, and we need to keep our eyes focused on it. But one that overlays all of those areas is the issue of data management. We have lots of records, and a lot of them are on paper or in spreadsheets or whatever, and they really aren't looked at or mined for the sort of information that they can supply and guide growers and people who are in the industry as to what the risks might be. And I think we need to learn. There are some packages out there that can be used. Know that we've got a few that came out of the United States, but we really need to be looking at the data and mining it for what it can tell us about what's happened in the past and where it happened and why it happened and what might possibly happen in the future under a certain set of environmental conditions. So I think that sort of challenge is really the next thing we need to be looking at. And the other is that we now have sustainability frameworks for nearly all of the agricultural sectors, horticulture included. And I think that that's going to become more and more important as we try to export our product to other countries. And they'll be looking at our sustainable framework and whether or not growers are adhering to those frameworks or not. Food safety is a very much a key part of those sustainable frameworks. And everybody wants to produce sustainably. We want to protect our environment. We want to do things in a way that leaves it in a good condition for our future farmers, etc. So I think that what we need to be looking at is how can we produce our products in a sustainable framework that enhances food safety risks rather than posing food safety risks. So they're the two things that I think are really important topics that are coming up into the future.
Yeah, those are some really excellent points, Robyn. And I think we see some really relevant examples of that when we look at things like packaging and recycled packaging and really understanding any non-intentionally added substances that might be present in recycled packaging that then is a food contact surface for produce. So those are really critical conversations where we need to get both sustainability and food safety right. Andreas, switching gears a little bit here and just talking a little bit about the Fresh Produce Safety Centre. And, you've been our board chair now for a couple of years. What's our vision for the future?
Yeah, I think we've gone through quite a few changes over the last 10 or 11 years, where we started out with a very clear mission on understanding gaps. I think as we've gone through that cycle, a lot of time we've spent on disseminating that information, but we're just renewing the focus on research and what that actually means as far as understanding the risks in this context are concerned. So it's certainly something that we're looking forward to renewing and basically providing up-to-date information and making sure that's relevant for the industry as well. So that's one of the platforms that we're looking. We're also a useful forum that's becoming increasingly trusted by the industry, by the regulators, to actually bring the various stakeholders together and have some sensible conversations about what the actual risks are and how we might have to mitigate those in a way that it doesn't impact negatively on the productivity that we need out of our farmers. So there's a lot of different stakeholders that we're bringing together, and I think that's a very important role of the industry as well.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Now, we will have all of the details to some of the references that Andreas has made in our show notes as well. So please do make sure to check those out. Go to our website. All of that information is available. What a fantastic conversation we've had, Andreas, Robyn. Thank you so much for your insights. Can you tell me some top takeaways for our listeners in terms of things we can action or influence to drive an impact on food safety?
Yeah, I think one of the key things to think about is that our food safety programs, our quality programs are not static systems. When something changes, we need to adapt. And we've seen that in a number of issues, food safety-wise, in Australia and New Zealand, where issues arose because we didn't adapt. So where we had, for example, weather events and contamination events that weren't dealt with because we just assumed the system will do its job. I think that's been recognized in the new primary production and processing standards, where the regulators are basically very clear on that we have to adapt when the weather conditions change. And so we don't necessarily always have the full information either as far as what the risks are. And so that's certainly something that we will continue to work on and providing some guidance on. So changing the system as things change is really quite critical. One of the most important things changing are obviously things associated with water, whether it's a drought or whether it's a flood, whether it's a rain event that splashes contamination back onto the product from the soil. All those sort of things need to be really thought about quite carefully.
Thanks so much for those actionable insights, Andreas. Robyn, what are the top takeaways that you would like to share with our listeners today?
it's been an interesting discussion about where the FPSC has come from and what we've been trying to do in terms of education, research, and outreach. And I think the role for us in the future is still the same. And I think we need to reinvigorate our research. We've had some research going on in Australia now, but I think we probably need to streamline it and prioritise it and really bring together the team of researchers around Australia to work collaboratively to identify the risks and to look at the solutions for some of the problems that we're having, such as Andreas mentioned with water. So that's one thing. In terms of outreach, our model is that the FPSC is funded by pledges from industry, very generously given, and that basically is our operational model. That's what we use. We use the money for outreach and running the FPSC. And I think into the future, we need to think about how we can basically grow that pie so that we can do more for industry. And we need to do it in a way that's sustainable into the future. So with this last horticulture food safety initiative that Susannah is very competently running, what are we going to do after that? How are we going to finance and reach everybody out there with educational material? The other thing is, how do people want to receive it in this day and age? It's, we've gone are the days where people can come to training programs or whatever. They basically want information here and now. So we need a feedback from industry as to how they want to receive this information and in what form, and and the topics that interest them most. We do have a help desk with the Horticulture Food Safety Initiative, so you can get an instant connection to information if that's what you need. But just longer term, how are we going to tackle the topic of outreach and educating, particularly those growers who are not necessarily associated with certification systems? How are we going to reach those people? Because remember, food safety and food safety incursions affect us all, the whole industry, not just the people who incur the food safety risk phenomenon. Anyway, so they're my insights into the future.
One thing I would add to that as well is that we have a clear focus that we need to communicate in people's primary languages, for example, to be able to reach out and be more effective in what we do. And so that's certainly something that we're looking at with translations to some of our material and making sure that we're as accessible as we possibly can be.
So, Andreas, we've got a wide range of listeners dialing in for our podcast. Can you talk a little bit about how this is relevant and practical to, say, growers?
Yeah, I think there's a number of different levels in which we're trying to address that. First, obviously, through the research, and that's fairly high level. And that's very useful for people that are food safety professionals and that need to translate that into something that is useful by the grower. But we also have developed specific fact sheets that help growers actually utilize that information directly on their farm, make it as easily accessible as possible. But it's also a set of tools that people that help growers like industry development officers can easily utilize. It's information that's readily digestible, is free to use, and that can help get the message out there as far and wide as possible. I think at the end of the day, we all want to do the right thing, but having the information of how to do that is really critical. And so that's where that information that we provide on our website and through our different forums, including these podcasts, is going to be very helpful to the industry as a whole.
A perfect example of that is there was some dispute about how long pathogens actually last in soil, particularly after you've added organic or manure-based fertilisers. And the Fresh Produce Safety Centre gathered together a panel of experts who were both growers and industry people and also scientists. And they reviewed all of the literature that was available and then came up with what's in the guidelines, which is a decision tree. So if you've got a certain set of environmental conditions, you can actually follow that decision tree to see how risky your situation is for pathogens surviving in the soil longer than, say, they would normally be. are viable. So those sorts of things are really important for growers, and I think we can do more of those sorts of things, and I think they're things we should be doing in the future.
That's fantastic. I also just wanted to build on that, particularly for people that might be listening to this that aren't necessarily from the industry or are not growers or people specifically working in food safety, is that if you think about our food systems and our food supply in Australia and New Zealand, we are incredibly fortunate to have some of the safest produce that's available globally. So if you think about the incredible effort that our growers are putting in every day to get our produce to us, we should be so thankful to the work that goes in around managing risks. I think what's really important is that we understand what those risks are through some of the systems that we've talked about, so that when things do go wrong, we've got the ability to manage it and continue to have safe produce within our supply chains. So what a fantastic conversation, and that's such a great lead-in to share with our listeners where to find the Fresh Produce Safety Centre resources. So you can visit our website. All of the details are in the show notes. We have scientific, evidence-based materials and practical tools to support your work in food safety. Please subscribe to our newsletters, share, connect with the FPSC on LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram to be part of the conversation. If you're part of the industry and you're working in food safety, contact Susannah and join our community of practice. What a great platform for peer learning. And stay tuned for our next episode where we dive deeper into fresh produce food safety guidelines and how to implement them into your operations. Robyn talked about Richard Bennett. So Richard Bennett will join us for episode 2, which is very exciting. And the other person I wanted to do a shout out to is Dr. Elizabeth Frankish, who is also going to join us for episode 2. And Robyn talked about the PhD students earlier in the history of the FPSC, and Elizabeth was one of those PhD students. So how very exciting that she's been working on the guidelines and she'll be joining us. And we will also be joined by Dr. Sharon Horton, who's been leading all of the technical and editorial work on the guidelines. Thanks everybody for joining us. We really appreciate you making time in your busy schedules to listen to our podcast. Andreas, Robyn, thank you so much for your time, and we look forward to you joining us in our next episode.